Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
So now that it's all over, where do the Conservatives go from here? It's been 1 week since the federal election. The ballots are counted, the race is over, and it's come time for the post-mortem. After such a disappointing loss, frankly, in many ways, a humiliating loss, many questions remain about the future direction of the Conservative Party of Canada and the leader who blew a 25-point lead, losing his own seat in the process. If you're someone who has only recently started paying attention to politics, or if, like me, you're a seasoned political junkie, this is the show for you. I'm David Smith. Today on The Big Story, what does the future hold for Canada's Conservatives and for Pierre Poilievre? And I'm joined today by two veteran Conservative strategists. Neil Brodie worked in the Harper government as a chief of staff to the president of the Treasury Board and an advisor to the Harper PMO. Hello, Neil. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
And Jordan Paquet is here as well. He was principal secretary to former Conservative Party leader Rona Ambrose, and he is now vice president at Blue Sky Strategy Group here in Ottawa. Hello, Jordan.
Hello, David. Hello, Neil. Great to be here.
So let's dive right into the big question right off the top. Neil, I'll start with you. Based on what you have seen and heard now in the past week, do you think there will be some kind of push from the Conservative Caucus to oust Pierre Poilievre as the leader? Why or why not?
Well, we heard at the end of last week that a Conservative MP in Alberta has decided to step down, presumably to let Mr. Poilievre run in his riding and get a seat in the House of Commons. So I think that that's put off the push to oust him. I mean, there may be a few people who are upset and try to rally support to get rid of Mr. Poilievre, but I don't think they'll find broad support. I think if memory serves, they need 20% of the caucus to do that, which would be, somebody can do the math better than me, like 28 people to do that, 28, 30.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so I don't think we'll get that many.
And Jordan, anything to add to that? Based on what you've seen, give me your impression of what the reaction from conservative voices, influential conservatives has been, voices within caucus. What's your impression of the reaction from caucus this week?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that he's quite rock solid inside of caucus in terms of his support. I think you saw pretty much right away after last Monday's election, you had a number of influential Conservative MPs coming out and expressing their support for Mr. Poilievre and for him staying on. My understanding is that he spent a couple of days last week talking to a lot of members of caucus, getting their opinions, getting the opinions of people who maybe weren't successful or lost their seat. And I think what I understand, he heard overwhelmingly loud and clear that there was that support for him to stay on. After losing his seat, I think certainly a couple people might have had questions raised, but the party, Mr. Poilievre, his team have moved quite quickly to address a lot of those issues. You had Damien Kirk, as Neil mentioned, stepping aside or offering to step aside. You had Mark Carney going ahead and saying he wasn't going to play any games, and allowing the CPC leader to get in the House rather quickly. So I think one of those questions that people had lingering last week, most of those have been resolved now, and now it's just a matter of timing.
Yeah, and let's talk about that by-election here for a minute. If there was any indecision on Poilievre's part or on the party's part about his future as the leader, do you think that the by-election would have come through so quickly? If there was a chance that Poilievre was going to be stepping down, or if the party knew that there was enough disunity within the caucus that he may lose a vote and be voted out as leader, would they have pulled the trigger on making that riding available to him to run in a by-election, Neil?
No, if there was, 75% of the caucus airing grievances against Mr. Poilievre after the election, I don't think it would have, a free riding would have popped up as quickly. I think that's the clearest signal that Mr. Poilievre will be leader of the Conservative Party into the foreseeable future, that somebody stepped up so quickly and offered their seat going into tomorrow's caucus meeting.
And Jordan, something that you and I discussed before we started recording, actually, just so people who are not super familiar with federal politics, a lot of listeners may be getting into it now after such a spectacular election that we just had. That's a fairly normal process. If a leader of a party, whether they've just been elected leader or whether they don't have a seat already, or if they've lost their seat, which is the case in Mr. Poilievre's circumstance, it's a normal convention in party politics that you find a safe seat and you allow your leader to run in that riding so that they can get into the House of Commons. That's a totally normal convention, right?
It is. And it's happened in every party. I mean, going back, looking back, I was just looking recently, Mackenzie King won the 1945 election with a minority, but lost his own seat in Saskatchewan. So they found a seat in Ontario for him to run in. They quit by-election after that. When Brian Mulroney became leader of the opposition in 1983, Elmer MacKay stepped aside out east temporarily for Mulroney to get in. And same with Jean Chrétien. When he came in as leader of the opposition, he didn't have a seat in the House in 1990. And somebody stepped aside in Beauséjour for him to go into it. And so I mean, in all these situations, the two leader of the opposition, I mean, they had gone on to then win the election after that.
Yeah. Brian Mulroney jumps to mind as well. He was from Quebec, but he represented a Nova Scotia riding.
Right, Central Nova.
That was the one that was available for him. Okay, glad that we've covered that. Just sort of procedural nuance to the situation facing Mr. Poilievre with that by-election. So back to the larger question at hand, which is Poilievre's future and the party's future. A lot of people pointing out the last two Conservative Party leaders, Andrew Scheer in 2019 and then Erin O'Toole in 2021, were both one-and-done leaders. They had one kick at the can to run an election campaign, and then they were out. Scheer resigned after a disappointing performance in 2019. Erin O'Toole was actually ousted by the Conservative caucus in a vote. How would you say, Neil, I'll start with you. How would you say this election that we've just had was different from those previous two losses for the Conservatives?
Yeah, Mr. Scheer, during the general election in 2019, had some own goals during that election. He couldn't remember if he was an insurance agent. He couldn't remember if he was an American citizen. He couldn't remember his position on some social issues. But I still would have been okay if he had stayed, because he moved the electoral needle. He gained, for the Conservative Party, he gained 25 or 26 seats in that election. Mr. O'Toole, in the 2021 election, didn't move the needle. The Conservatives had 120 seats before the election and had 120 seats after the election. But if we remember back during the pandemic election, Mr. Trudeau didn't move the needle for the Liberals either. 160 seats before the election, 160 seats after the election. But what would be different between those two is there was an organized opposition to Mr. O'Toole within the Conservative caucus, led by Mr. Poilievre. And there was no organized opposition to Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal Party. So O'Toole lost his position as party leader, and Mr. Trudeau didn't. If you're looking how to update those to the 2025 election that just happened last week, Mr. Poilievre moved the needle. He again gained, I think, around 25, 26 seats. He expanded the reach of the party. The Conservative Party won ridings they weren't expected to win. And I think that's a reasonable argument to take to caucus and to Conservative Party members to say, I deserve another I deserve to stay on and hopefully have another chance to run in the next election.
And Jordan, over to you. What would you say are the key differences between the 2019 loss, the 2021 loss, where one leader stepped down, the other was ousted, compared to 2025, where they did lose the election, but Mr. Poilievre's made no indication he's going to resign, and there's been really no evidence as of yet that there's any kind of meaningful dissent within caucus around his leadership. What's the difference?
Sure. So there's a few things, and largely echoing a lot of what Neil said. But go back to 2019. I think some of the dissent in that particular case came from outside, from organizers outside and influencers outside the party to challenge Mr. Scheer. It would have required a lot of effort on the part of Andrew Scheer and his team to get out right away, crisscross across the country, make the calls they have to call, and make that willingness to stay. In Aaron O'Toole's case, I think they tried to push off the questions of leadership a little bit too far. They didn't answer the challenge from caucus. They were kind of dismissive about it. And as we all know, you start dismissing the Conservative caucus at your own peril. They will come up pretty quickly and make a decision on that. And that's what happened in that case. Now, what I think Poilievre and his team may have learned from those two cases is that he has to do perhaps what those guys didn't do, start making those calls quickly, make the calls to the key MPs, the key influencers, make your intention to stay, and don't shy away from any challenge or question on leadership.
Much of the punditry and the analysis that I have seen on the outcome of this election for the Conservatives, it's fallen more or less along two lines. In one camp, there are those voices who say Poilievre should not stay on as the leader. A former advisor to Prime Minister Harper penned an op-ed in the Montreal Gazette this week and laid out her reasons why she thinks Poilievre should step down. In one camp, you lost the election. There are no prizes for second place. Pierre Poilievre and his campaign lost. They failed, full stop. In another camp, yes, they lost the election, but as Jordan, you've mentioned, they've picked up 24 odd seats, increased their share of the popular vote. They picked up support in demographics where the Conservatives have struggled in the past, namely among young people and unionized workers. So even though they lost, there are a lot of positives that they can build on. So Neil, over to you. Which of those two arguments do you think will be more persuasive in internal party deliberations and in caucus discussions?
I think those narratives from last week have been overtaken by events. With Mr. Poilievre seemingly on track to get back to the House of Commons, I would say that the second argument worked. And it's a pretty good argument. At some point, you have to stick with the leader of the party, even if that party does not win government. The electorate has to get used to a leader. There can't be a new face every election. The real question is, what will Mr. Poilievre do with the time he has between now and the next election? Hopefully he uses that time constructively. But I think the picking up seats, expanding into new areas, I think that was the argument. I would imagine that was the argument that was used talking with caucus this week. And I think it's a reasonable argument.
Okay, Jordan, what do you think they're going to be talking about in all of these internal deliberations? How much weight do you think they will put on some of those positives, even though, if I'm going to be perfectly blunt about it, it was in many respects a humiliating loss for this party? They blew a 25-point lead. Where do you think the balance is between those two competing narratives?
Well, I think they just have to look at some of the raw numbers. I mean, people say they blew a 25-point lead, but at the end of the day, they were much higher before when the Liberals were at tanking in the polls. I think, when the Liberals were at 20%, the Conservatives were at 45%. They finished this election with 41.5% in the face of a lot of other external events beyond their control that happened. I don't think that this meeting is going to be very contentious at all. I think people will go through. They'll probably pass the Reform Act just because that is a conservative policy initiative that was put on by Michael Chong. So I think out of respect, usually they would go forward and pass something like that. And then I think they'll move on to talking about their plans for the next couple months.
Okay, I want to move along to talk about premiers. big part of the story. A lot of the media narrative, really, and the speculation around Poilievre's future has been driven by comments made in the past week by two progressive conservative premiers. And I emphasize progressive conservative premiers. There's a divide inside the Conservative Party, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone can jump in, between Western conservatism and Eastern conservatism. It goes back to the splitting up of the federal party when there was the Reform Party and the Progressive Conservative Party federally back in the Mulroney days, and then Stephen Harper unified the two parties into one big, beautiful blue tent. But there's always been kind of some tension there. So Tim Houston in Nova Scotia and Doug Ford in Ontario have both criticized the federal Conservatives in the last couple of weeks. Tim Houston said the party needs to do some, quote, soul searching. Doug Ford says he finds it ironic that federal Conservatives are attacking him for weighing in on their campaign struggles, when in the recent Ontario election, federal Conservatives were instructed not to help support the Provincial Party. So what do you make of those comments? Are they saying the federal Conservatives are Premiers Houston and Doug Ford saying the federal Conservatives are too ideological and they need to consider being more moderate, like provincial progressive Conservatives, if they want to be electable, because that's what it sounds like to many people. Neil, I'll start with you on that one.
I mean, I'll characterize the comments by the two premiers as constructive criticism. I'll take you back to 2004. That was the first federal election that Mr. Harper ran in after the formation of the Conservative Party. During that 2004 election, it began with Mr. Harper looking like he might form, and the Conservative Party might form government. But at the end of the election, Mr. Martin and the Liberals had won enough seats to form a minority parliament. So Mr. Harper had seen the opportunity to end 8 years of government slip away during the election. At that time, the Conservative Party was less than a year old, but they had gained 27 seats over the former, whatever it was, the Canadian Alliance at the time, and put a dent in what seemed like a Liberal juggernaut that was projected to govern for 20 years. There were calls at the time for his resignation. Mr. Harper quieted down the worry warts, and then he went to work. He reviewed the makeup of his office and his campaign team. At the time, he made what were seen as quite drastic changes to the senior staff in both offices, and then he began preparing for the next election. He moderated his message. He understood that the conservative tent needed to be bigger. So perhaps Mr. Poilievre will take a page from Conservative Party history and look in the coming months to talk with Mr. Ford, Mr. Houston, and see if they have any input on how to make the federal Conservative Party better, stronger, and more ready to fight the next election.
Okay, very interesting. Jordan, over to you on that one. So what do you make of the Premier's comments? Are these comments, a cry for help from within the Conservative movement? Somebody please get a message to Pierre Poilievre. He's so terrible and he won't listen to us. Or are you more aligned with what Neil is saying, that it's constructive criticism? And it's, to Neil's point, going back to Harper in 2004, moderating the message, expanding the tent. Are these things that you think Pierre Poilievre should be doing in this time where he's starting to rebuild his own campaign and rebuild trust with his caucus, and as they take stock and do a post-mortem on this election loss?
Let's start in Nova Scotia. I mean, I'm from back east in PEI, so it's easy to just kind of look across the water. In that particular case, a lot like many of the same, yes, it's the old PC tradition. But if you look at the old PC types, Peter MacKay, he was out crisscrossing the country this campaigning for Conservatives. Tim Houston's own wife was out door knocking in Central Nova for the Conservative candidate. A lot of his staff took some leave to work on Conservative campaigns. So at that level, a lot of the volunteers are the same, the donors are the same, and many times the message is the same. Sometimes premiers in the East specifically try and distance themselves from the federal party because the federal party isn't as popular in the East Coast as perhaps some of the provincial versions. I think in Tim Houston's case, that's more that. In the provincial election, you saw him publicly distance himself, said, it's a different party. I'm not a member of that party, and whatnot moving forward. So that case is a little bit different. I think in the Ford, Ontario case, I think that might be more some personal vendettas on display, not something that runs a whole lot deeper. I think some of this is exactly which is some of the personalities at the top, some bitter things from the past, perhaps that we have to get into it all. But it seems like a lot of that really spelled out that. I think Ontario, with what makes up Ford's base across the province, are very much aligned under Pierre, and I think Doug Ford's probably started to realize that in the past week.
Okay, very interesting. So, Neil, on soul searching, I thought the term soul searching was interesting, because it speaks to sort of a fundamental level of the way that Pierre Poilievre and his team approached the last election. Moving forward out of this, we've talked so much during this election about Pierre Poilievre being his campaign was so leader-centric. A lot of his MPs were not doing local media. They were not doing local debates. Everything was very centralized from the top down. For better or for worse, Pierre Poilievre was that campaign, and it didn't work. Ultimately, not enough people wanted to support him. He's not the prime minister today. So moving forward out of this, and they'll have a caucus meeting tomorrow on Tuesday, and they'll talk about all of this. What does Pierre Poilievre, the leader, need to do? Would you advise him to think really deeply and fundamentally about his own personal brand and image and consider changing to try and be a little bit more moderate, because the feedback has been that he turned so many people off? Lisa Raitt, the former Conservative MP, former cabinet minister, said on television in the last week of the campaign, what she was hearing at the doors was that people liked the Conservative policies and they wanted Mark Carney to implement them. So it's a personal leadership thing. What do you think about that, Neil?
Well, let's unpack it a few different ways. For sure, Mr. Poilievre needs to, Mr. Houston's words are soul searching. But you do need to deconstruct the election campaign, what worked, what didn't work. Internal party pollsters will be trying to figure out what messages resonated with which groups of Canadians. If we think, well, maybe not you guys are pretty perfect, but I've made a number of mistakes in my life. And every time you make a mistake, you do a bit of a review of that and see how you can do better next time. So of course I would expect Mr. Poilievre and a team to go through that and do an unpacking of the campaign, the messaging, and trying to figure out what might work better next time. That is definitely not wasted time. Depending on who gets to do it, it might be wasted. You want to have somebody who's got enough experience to be able to look through issues that maybe aren't the biggest issues and really drill down on the larger issues. And you want somebody who's willing to speak truth to the leader, which sometimes is not always as easy as you might think it is. All of us in our life have bosses, and you know what it's like to go into the boss and say, "Hey, I think we could do this better." You're always taking you might think you're taking your life in your hands, but I don't think there needs to be a wholesale change in the Conservative message. Lower taxes, safer streets. When you think about what ails the country today, lower taxes and safer streets would go a long way to alleviating a lot of the problems with the country right now.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. So, Jordan, you'll get the last word for today's show because we are running out of time. But on Pierre Poilievre, him as the leader, his brand was so front and center, so overpowering, and it didn't work. They bet on his brand, and it didn't work. So what kind of changes do you think he should be considering in the wake of this election loss if he's going to stay on as leader and fight another election in 2, 3, 4 years from now?
Sure, and I think it's a foregone conclusion that he will stay on. There's just no organization out there to make a move on it, nor perhaps should they. I think there was some success, but let's look at what he could do a little bit differently. I think one thing that people perhaps reflected on in 2015, after a few years of the Harper government, is that said really like the policies, like the message, like what was happening. You just got to maybe work on the tone a little bit more, have a little more positive and hopeful tone. And I think you saw some of that towards the end of the campaign, some of this message on change and hope and kind of his performance towards the end of the debates. Look, it's hard to shift from opposition leader mode to suddenly talking like a prime minister, because people he was a very effective opposition leader. He basically, his efforts got rid of Justin Trudeau, got rid of the carbon tax, which were the two main stated policy goals of or two main goals of the party over the last number of years. So I think on the big things, they got it right. One thing that the party reflected on in 2015 and moving forward is that people love the policies. Canadians love the policies. I think just to what Ms. Wright was saying, but just to work on the tone and just maybe improving the way overall how it's delivered. I think that will go very much a long way in attracting even a great number of Canadians into the Conservative movement and to give Pierre another look moving forward. We saw some of that towards the end of the campaign. And how he was doing more of that hopeful message at the end of the debates. I think we'll see more of that, and it will just it'll pay off in dividends.
Okay, that is our time for today. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining the program today to give us some inside perspective on how all of this works and how it will shake out inside the Conservative Party in the coming weeks and months ahead. Neil Brodie, thank you so much for your time today. Always great to chat with you.
It was my pleasure, David.
And Jordan Paquet, thank you so much as well. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, David. And thanks so much, Neil, for the conversation.
Have a great week, everyone.
And again, that is Neil Brodie. He worked in the Harper government, an advisor to the Harper PMO, chief of staff to the president of the Treasury Board. And Jordan Paquet was principal secretary to former Conservative leader Rona Ambrose. He is now vice president at Blue Sky Strategy Group. And that is the big story for today. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode. Email us hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. We love hearing from you. You can find us on the Seeker app, as always, or on any of your other favorite podcast players. Please remember to rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Until next time, thank you for listening.